Avatar: The Last Airbender is one of my favorite shows, probably one of the best shows of all time. So I'm gonna watch this Philosophy of Uncle Iroh video and probably agree with pretty much everything in it.
One of the most moving moments in The Last Airbender is Iroh's chapter in Tales of Ba Sing Se. It's really a short film
Oh yeah,
at just 4 minutes 17 seconds long, but it's so well crafted that even showing it to an audience unfamiliar with Avatar, it would still hit all of its emotional
turn it
beats.
up.
Iroh is walking through the great city of his supposed enemy, and backed by happy, carefree music, he joyfully helps those strangers he encounters. But this joyful tone of the story is suddenly overturned when Iroh arrives at a hilltop to remember the birthday of his son, Lu Ten, who died on the front lines in the war years before. He actually sings the infamous song Leaves from the Vine earlier in the short for a child, but the music and song suddenly become somber when he sings it again for his son in memorial. But the way that Andrew Huebner, the writer...
Whenever I go back to rewatch Avatar, I always cry at that part every time. It's like the only show that has a filler episode that is one of the best episodes of the whole show.
for the short develops this emotion across just 4 minutes 17 seconds of screen time is really skillful. The other stories in Tales of Ba Sing Se seem to have more narrative direction. Toph is about getting a makeover and her insecurities, Sulcus is about trying to win a haiku competition, Aang's is about trying to free animals, Zuko is about him getting and struggling with a date, but Iroh's story lacks that same direction at first. It feels meandering, with him just helping random strangers that he comes across. But who he helps and how he helps them tells a different story. And that's because Iroh's chapter in Tales of Ba Sing Se and his story across the series more broadly is truly about fatherhood. And what's interesting is that this provides a new and perhaps more nuanced lens through which we can understand Zuko's character arc. And in the vein of the difficult discussion that we're about to get into, on December 6th, just a week from now, I will be doing a charity livestream for 24 hours straight, no sleep, here on YouTube for Crisis Text Line. I hope that you can tune in and help me donate. Part 1. Crying boy, whom he sings to and calms. The second are boys slightly older, to whom he explains that being honourable means facing up to your mistakes. And the third is the most interesting, a young man who tries to rob him. Instead of fighting him off, Iroh calmly explains how to hold a better stance with a knife and then drinks tea with him, encouraging him to be who he wants to be. The young man even confesses that nobody has ever believed in him like that before. And the beautiful subtlety of Iroh's character in this chapter meant that Huebner only needed one line when Iroh sets up the memorial for Lu Ten for this emotional beat to really hit home. Happy birthday, my son. If only I could have helped you. The beauty in this final piece is in how it recontextualizes all these moments in his story before. I don't think it's a coincidence that the people Iroh helps are the different stages of what had been his son's life, a child, a young boy, and a man. Nor a coincidence that he teaches a young boy about how honor comes from humility and impresses on him to follow his own path rather than one of violence, something he has tried to teach Zuko, whom he sees as a son. Fundamentally, each of these were crafted by Huebner to be fatherly moments, because Iroh's greatest loss is the son that he feels he failed as a...
Well, I'm definitely gonna have to rewatch Avatar over again for like the 10th time.
Father. Iroh wasn't just the Fire Nation general who led the army against the walls of Ba Sing Se. In truth, he was a warmonger, someone at the head of an expansionist nationalistic power, and the episode Zuko alone reveals how removed he was from the violence that he had caused, that he didn't see the scars people are left with, physically or mentally. Ba Sing Se must be something to behold, he says. I hope you may all see it someday, if we don't burn it to the ground first. For Zuko, a pearl dagger from the general who surrendered when we broke through the outer wall. Note the inscription and the superior craftsmanship. The scene doesn't just show how Iroh was blind to the waste and suffering of war, but he believed in the glory of war, of the fight, the honor in spilling blood. In a very real sense, Iroh embodied an idea of strength being about violence and conquest, of respect coming from power over others, and he's ignorant to the trauma and toll that this takes on others because there is little room in this idea of strength for humility or compassion. While not exclusive to men, these ideas of strength hit many of the same projections that we see in unhealthy forms of
I like this dude's backdrop.
masculinity.
Is that a stack of the same book? Is that his book?
Violence and anger are sociologically more male problems, and reading these characters through that lens gives us some insight into what it means to be a man in our world. Because all of this changed when Lu Ten, the son he sent into battle in the war he led, that he believed in, was killed on the front lines. Iroh was no longer removed. He suddenly felt the full weight of his idea of strength, that there is no glory in blood, no respect in your enemy's submission, no honor in violence, no power in anger when it cannot heal what is lost. Only a fragile hope that these little boys might come marching home. And Leaves from the Vine beautifully
I like how he incorporated the lyrics of the song into that.
captures that sense of waste. Narratively, Iroh seems to have gone through his character arc before the story of the series began. He came to understand that only ruin and pain could come from that ideology. And what's interesting here is that Iroh's emotional journey is reflected in Zuko's character arc. He goes through a similar change, and though we can visualize his struggle as an internal one between good and evil, I think it's both more interesting and nuanced to see it through the lens of a struggle between what we could read as two very different ideas of what it means to be a man. Part 2.
He is a father to me.
If we look at Zuko's arc through this lens, on either side of him are Ozai and Iroh, the two male role models in his life. And Ozai embodies what we would see as a horrific kind of masculinity. He controls and abuses his children and wife both emotionally and
The drawing of the mother on the very right, the black and white looking one, that is a terrified looking woman right there. What scene is this? What? Okay.
physically. He sees submission as the same as respect, power as the same as honor. He doesn't just believe in the glory of war, but he takes pleasure in the violence of it. To him, pride means you never back down from a fight. When Aang shows him mercy, he accuses him of weakness. Even with all the power in the world, you are still weak. Ozai embodies those men who see empathy.
Well, I can tell you that he never comes back to rise up. 'Cause you don't really hear of him again in Legend of Korra.
And humility as weakness, and their independence as a strength when it really just means being alone. And at the beginning of his story, Zuko believes in this. He's convinced that the only person who can restore his honor is this abusive monster, and that the only way to do it was to capture or kill the Avatar, through an expression of power and violence. He's hot-headed, he refuses help from others, and he believes in the glory of war. After all, it's the Fire Nation's way of spreading their greatness to the world. Zuko fully buys into Ozai as his male role model. And then in sharp contrast stands Uncle Iroh, who has moved past this deluded way of thinking. But the beautiful thing is that Iroh doesn't just dismantle Ozai's horrible ideas around violence and power for Zuko, but he gives him a new kind of strength. Iroh embodies what we would see as a new healthy masculinity. Where Ozai sees weakness in relying on others, Iroh teaches Zuko to draw on the wisdom of those around him with lightning redirection, and that accepting help makes you strong.
Yeah, how you gonna get better if you never learn? Because if you're just stuck in your ways, somebody's gonna catch on, and they're gonna work around you.
Stronger. Where Ozai is prideful, Iroh teaches Zuko that pride is the source of his shame, and that instead, there is honor and humility before others, rather than weakness. And in Tales of Ba Sing Se, Iroh isn't afraid to cry, to feel, to weep for what he has lost. something that was previously presented to Zuko as a sign of dishonor and being weak. When Zuko's crying on the ground before the duel with his father, begging for forgiveness for refusing to fight, Ozai calls it shameful weakness. But the more nuanced contrast between Iroh and Ozai is really in their approach to violence.
That Zuko boy been talking to his uncle again.
A lot of stories would present a reductionist binary choice between violence
Getting them stupid ideas about truth and love in your head.
and non-violence. But Avatar resists that simplistic portrayal. Iroh's philosophy doesn't mean being pacifist, but rather changing why you fight, which is what he did. Like many male abusers today, Ozai uses violence, anger, and fear as a means to control others to get what he wants. But Iroh isn't just unafraid to fight, he actively seeks retribution where he deems fit and just, like with Admiral Zhao. And that's the difference. When looking at Zuko's character arc, understanding this different approach to violence is a massive part of his change. Learning that having the wisdom to choose the just battles you should fight is different to cowardice. That learning when to walk away is just as important as knowing when to stand your ground. It's that difference between anger and righteous anger. And I think that this is much of what Zuko's character arc is really about, much of what Iroh is meant to represent for him in the story. Part 3.
And you get a lot of Iroh's story from Zuko, because Zuko's, as it goes on, he's not fighting to get acceptance from his father anymore. He's fighting for I guess fighting to help Iroh, and I don't, oh man, I gotta rewatch it because I don't really remember. I know that he was fighting for Iroh. And he was trying to be like Iroh. Be all spiritual and lovey-dovey and whatnot. Having friends. I remember all that.
What do you want?
It's because of this journey that Iroh doesn't just see himself in Zuko, but he sees his son Lu Ten as well. In the Siege of the North, Iroh tearfully confesses to Zuko that he has come to love him as his own son after Lu Ten died, because Iroh fears that this ideology will lead Zuko down the same path of destruction that Iroh paved, encouraged, and lost Lu Ten to. This is why Zuko's story is so laden with language and imagery that draws on fatherhood for them. One of the most powerful moments in the series is built on exactly this, when Zuko finally faces down against his father during the Day of Black Sun. I'm gonna free Uncle Iroh from his prison and I'm gonna beg for his forgiveness. He's the one who's been a real father to me. For so long, all I wanted was for you to love me, to accept me. I thought it was my honor that I wanted, but really, I was just trying to please you. You, my father, who banished me just for talking out of turn. My father, who challenged me, a 13-year-old boy, to an Agni Kai. How could you possibly justify a duel with a child? To which Ozai replies, it was to teach you respect. But Zuko sees how pathetic that is, how wrong it is now. Because Zuko's character arc doesn't just culminate in him rejecting his worst impulses and joining the right side.
That's
the
more
language
like
in this scene
knowing your
emphasizes
place.
the role of fatherhood, and Zuko's choice to embody that new kind of healthy masculinity in Iroh.
You want to know something about knowing your place? You really know your place when you make your place. Don't let somebody tell you where your place is.
Without cruelty, but with love. Likewise, I don't think it's any coincidence that Zuko defeats Ozai during the Day of Black Sun with a power that his uncle taught him, lightning redirection, rather than a vindictive violence or anger. And we can read this narratively as saying two things. Firstly, as a definitive and final rejection of those who embody Ozai's horrible masculinity, and secondly, as saying that Zuko is stronger for Iroh's healthy masculinity. Lightning redirection is a power that requires not letting your anger control you and understanding others. And to support this, the writers have employed a degree of literary symmetry between these two scenes. In both, Ozai tells Zuko to stand up and fight him, and where at the beginning of his story, Zuko's refusal to fight is seen as a sign of weakness by him. By the end of it, his decision to walk away is seen as a sign of strength. Zuko isn't afraid to fight, but he now has the wisdom to know which battles to fight, and that is a strength. But this moment is uniquely powerful in another way in this reading of Zuko and Iroh's arc. This new way of thinking allows Zuko to entirely remove his abuser's most powerful weapon, refusing to let it harm him, and instead leaving. It's an astoundingly beautiful metaphor for leaving your abuser if there ever was one. The writers truly crafted this scene with purpose, but there's something else. I think there's a deeper layer here for Iroh's place in the story, despite him not being there. Tales of Ba Sing Se reveals Iroh's immense guilt subtly developed across the series, and in this light, Zuko's character arc that culminates in this scene can simultaneously be read as a redemption for Iroh. I think much of Iroh's emotional journey is a redemption arc where he's trying to save his surrogate son from the ideology that got his true-born son killed when he succumbed to it. This is a textbook structure for a redemption arc. A character morally fails, they are confronted with their failure when it leads to personal ruin, and they then commit to acts that narratively reflect their moral failures of before to represent a deep understanding of that moral failure. Iroh's line, "If only I could have helped you," takes on a new meaning when we see him helping Zuko the way that he wished he did for Lu Ten, that final step in the redemption arc.
Okay, I'm good. Alright.
And by the end of it, Iroh fulfills his role as a father where he failed before at last. He can't bring back Lu Ten, but he can help Zuko from falling to the same fate.
I have yet to cry on camera. I'm gonna try and not do that. I'm gonna see how long it goes. Because when I'm off camera, I cry over everything. Like when I'm watching stuff. I'm stone cold whenever it comes to real life, but when I'm watching movies, oh yeah.
What does all of this mean though? We'd benefit from having more role models that give a nuanced exploration of these kinds of issues. Iroh is a good male role model, and that means being strong. But strength doesn't mean being cruel, emotionless, or alone. It means empathy, understanding, and wisdom. Iroh's arc is underpinned by loss, Zuko's is underpinned by abuse, and both by trauma. And I really enjoy looking at fiction through these sorts of lenses, understanding characters in that light, because I'm personally invested in those sorts of struggles. And that's why I'm doing a charity live stream on December 6th for 24 hours straight. No sleep, with Crisis Text Line, a mental health charity similar to one I work with here in New Zealand. It'll be the final chapter in their Get Out the Number campaign. More details below. I will be personally matching every donation up to $1,000, so it'd mean the world for you to join me in donating to this cause. I do need to just a joke. I'm just not very good at them, clearly. The concern was very heartwarming and kind, but I promise I will be drinking and eating. And what's really awesome is that across the stream I'm going to be joined by like a dozen other YouTubers and streamers, including None of Your Movies, OSP, Eugenia Cooney, and others.
I don't know any of those
my
people.
mission will be to complete all 3 of the original Spyro games in under 24 hours. It's type of thing.
Alright, well, I guess that's the end of the video. Okay. I'm gonna have to fix that button. Well, Uncle Iroh, he's a G. Definitely learned a lot from that dude growing up. And I really like the memes where he just says the most philosophical shit ever.